My name is Jeff Hapeman. I own Earth's Treasury, and I primarily focus on Montana sapphires, but really my business is about faceting American gemstones first where I can, but just unique and unusual gemstones from all over the world. I was in a corporate executive job flying a lot around the world, and I had a chance to switch jobs, so I decided to take a break and think about what I wanted to do. And living in Southern California, I got involved working at the Ocean View mine down in Pala. And as a boy, I had really been into minerals. And I had found the mine down there, and I had gone a couple times to their public fee dig because I just was like, this is, I still remembered the early 1970s find of the blue cap pockets when I was probably only 3 or 4 years old when that happened, but it was still big news in all the rocks and minerals magazines. So I knew that Southern California had pegmatites and minerals down there. So that really is what got me connected to there. And then when I had a little bit of time, I actually approached the mine owner, Jeff Swanger, and just said, I'd love to get involved. And I think at that time, Mark Mothner, who had worked at GIA, was taken away and wasn't able to be there as much. So I came in to kind of actually help them photograph and document things because of my passion for photography. And one thing kind of led to another. And one of the miners there, an older gentleman, kept telling me I should try faceting. He felt that I would enjoy it and that it would fit my personality, I suppose is what he said. And after he badgered me somewhat extensively for a while, I said, I'm just going to give it a shot. And so around 2013, I think, March or April, I faceted my first stone. And that kind of one thing led to another. As I was learning to facet, one of the people I really admired tremendously was Stefan Kotlowski, who had been a master faceter for Kremens, and then he had won many, many awards. I started talking to him as I was cutting gems, and he would share advice with me to kind of encourage me along. In fact, he encouraged me to enter the Spectrum Awards the first time. And it made me realize that what I liked about his work is there was something distinct. You couldn't put your finger on it, but you would see a stone cut by Stefan and you knew it was there. And I decided that what I wanted to do was create designs that maybe looked somewhat modern and somewhat classic at the same time. So I don't strive to go into very unusual or exotic designs and shapes. I like to keep them rather simple, even though they might not appear to be simple. So I tend to have designs that are not huge numbers of facets, but the visual appearance would never let you know that. So that's a little bit of the art and science combination that I try to put in them, and they tend to be a little angular and geometric. Most of my designs will start from a piece of rough that doesn't fit one of the designs I've already worked out. So my designs are usually the culmination of a very long process that starts with this piece of rough needs something unique and different, maybe because of the RI of the material or the shape, and I will sit down at the computer because I've got a technology background. I love using the computer, and I'll really just work through creating a design that fits that rough. And usually that's just the starting point. I'll put it aside and think about it for a while and come back and go through an iterative process of refining it and how I want it to appear visually. And really my focus is to create sort of a balance of the mathematical factors of high light return, high scintillation, with just sort of a gut feel about how it visually impacts you when you look at it. And depending on what the material is, I'll often test cut it a couple times first and tweak it based on that, because even the best computerized rendering programs really can't quite do justice to what happens when you finally cut the gemstone. And then even once I've found a design that I've decided is sort of a go-to, usually over a period of several years it will evolve. I'll come into a new piece of material, or I'll find a material with a different RI and I'll be sitting around playing around. I did this recently with the large sunstone I showed you earlier. That actually was a redesign of one of my core designs I've used for a long time. And I like the new version so much, it's essentially a V2 now of what that was. It may look the same from an outline perspective, but I redid almost every single angle on it. Yes, exactly. The Montana sapphires have a tendency to be just slightly oval. And I find classic ovals to be boring, is one way to put it, but also prone to, the bow tie effect where the middle of the gem can go dark. So I created a number of designs that use, some side facets that allow me to essentially integrate a brilliant pavilion into these oval shapes. And for the Montana sapphires, they actually, they have good brilliance and good natural clarity, and when they're heated, if needed, really outstanding clarity for the most part. So having a design that can, take advantage of that is great. And at the same time, I've also tried to adapt the designs to deepen the color on the lighter colored material, because a lot of the Montana material can be somewhat more pale. The blues, if they're too pale, can wash out and look gray. So by creating a little depth with the side facets that I use, you pick up a bit more color. And I guess the only thing I'd add about that is that a lot of people don't think about how pleochroic sapphire is, and Montana sapphires in particular have a strong dichroism between the two axes. And even the alluvial ones, if you take the time and care to locate the C-axis, you can really produce a much more spectacular stone. And I will almost always go for better color or scintillation or dispersion versus yield if I can. It's kind of I don't actually do the calculus in my head, but you get the gut feel of what you think is going to be better. I actually like to cut unusual stuff, especially stuff that has high dispersion. So recently I've been cutting a lot of chrome sphene, which I think looks spectacular. It can be a little frustrating because of the softness and the cleavage in the material, and you have to locate the optical axis so you don't get a tremendous amount of doubling. I also cut a piece of scheelite for the same reason, really fascinating. As funny as it'll sound for someone that's fascinating, I actually love a perfect round brilliant. So I've spent a lot of time trying to recreate the hearts and arrows effect of a perfect, ideally cut diamond in different gem materials. So I have a large number of versions of the diamond round brilliant tweaked for different gem material that I'll cut then.
Yeah, you don't hear that very often from cutters. They like cutting round brilliants. That's typically what you have to do in order to
The
please somebody.
perfect symmetry, if you do it just right, is pretty spectacular. Yeah.
And actually, Rex came in last year, and he loved the round brilliants as well. So.
Rex and I, that's how we met. He actually approached me when he first started, and he said, "What are you doing to get the hearts and arrows effect in some of that?" I had posted a photo of a large synthetic. As a boy, collecting minerals and picking up rocks everywhere, I think there's always an element of thinking, you'll find a gem. So as I got older and realized, America actually has a pretty significant amount of gemstone deposits. Many of them are not actively mined anymore, but they're out there, and that really led me to kind of pursue them. John Sankakis's books it's like my little, family Bible set that I go through all the time, and I've been trying to get as many different gem materials from as many different states as possible. One of my favorite ones I've done recently is not far from where I live in southeastern Pennsylvania. There's an Amish farm field that I tracked down from old collection records, and I've spent a couple weekends combing through it, finding amethyst crystals that I've faceted, and it's kind of my Amish amethyst, if you will. Stones and gems are really emotional, ultimately, at the end of the day. I mean, we can't say why we look at it and go, this is just, I have to have it, it's beautiful. And so the story that can tap into that and wrap around that beauty makes it even more desirable for most people overall. And actually for me, it's part of why I like cutting the stones and the stories that go with them. I tell my wife that a lot of the Montana sapphires I sell go to young couples as alternative engagement stones. And I love actually hearing their story of how they chose it. And, you hear common themes are like, I want a sapphire that looks like my fiance's eye color or something along those lines. So, there has to be a story. That's what makes it interesting. I think it's a challenge for the gem and jewelry trade as a whole that has had a real traditional model of how they do things. And, social media in particular is very disruptive to that. It's allowing what were once considered maybe eclectic tastes to be satisfied. Many of the clients I get are people who say, I just want a sapphire that isn't blue, and that's all I can get. So, it's not just that they come to me for a Montana sapphire. Many people are saying, I wanted one the color of the Caribbean Sea. Or we live in Hawaii and we want something that reminds us of the ocean around us. So I think social media for the gem industry and jewelry industry is going to continue to fundamentally change the way things are done. The customers are in more control and have more option to find what they're looking for. And the people in the trade that can adapt to that are really taking off. And I thought about it as I was here in Tucson. I'm meeting with a lot of really young people. And I sometimes hear that the jewelry industry is struggling and the millennials aren't buying. And I don't see that. I actually see the opposite. I see a lot of young, new people starting businesses, doing things differently than they've ever been done before, and reaching totally new sets of customers by leveraging things like Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat, if you will. I had a passion for the Montana sapphires, and they just were really hard to locate. And when I heard that Potentate was starting a new mine there, I reached out and I said, I really want to get involved, and I'd love to get a good source for these because I think they could be a significant market. And at the time, they still hadn't gotten up to full production and were doing what they were doing. But about a year later, as they started that process, I was able to sit down and talk with Warren Boyd, who handles the marketing for the mine, and Keith Barron, the PhD that owns the mine. And I cut a number of stones for them to show them that the cutting mattered a great deal, because they had done some preliminary cutting overseas, and it was okay. But these are trickier to cut than I think the generic blue sapphires. There's a lot more issues around orientation and how they're presented. So that kind of evolved to where we worked together to market some of their really large, ultra-fine stones and bring those to market. And part of that was really to help change the perception about them, that there are bigger stones, and yes, there can be very fine stones from Montana. They have to be treated in a way that makes a difference. They have to be heated differently. We're really hoping to continue to get more people interested, and it's been pretty gratifying to see here at Tucson this year a lot of interest, and major players down in the show floor who are now building lines of jewelry around Montana sapphires. It'd be great to just do a book. So earlier last spring, and probably around February, I decided I'm going to do this. Probably didn't realize how much work it was going to be. But I scheduled some special trips out to the mine to really fully document the mining process. And then I worked hard to assemble a collection of sort of the finest colors, finest shapes and sizes of the Montana sapphires, and then put together a book that covers the region they're from, the history of the mining in that area, which is pretty fascinating. It was mined hundreds some years ago for watch jewels. And then the modern change in what's going on and what that means. The environmental regulations are different these days. And then I just felt it was nice to showcase the array of color and beauty of what's there. And as you know, because I asked you to help me vet some of the science, I tried to slip in enough science that the average person can learn a little something along the way that will help them understand how these gemstones are formed and the colors that they get and the inclusions that are there. I haven't been in the industry for a tremendously long time, but in just the short period I've been involved, I have seen a shift, to where people are realizing we have to offer more variety and more either gem species or colors. So I think there's a real opportunity there. Asia has shown a tremendous amount of interest in alternative color sapphires. Interestingly enough, one of my largest customer bases outside the U.S. is Australia. And I think in particular the Australians and many in Asia enjoy the unique sapphires, the ones that are not straight blue, that might be party-colored, bi-colored, or just unusual colors. So I think there's a huge opportunity for growth.
Cool. One maybe final question.
Sure.
Maybe I know the answer already, but what's your favorite stone to cut?
Oh, actually, that's interesting. Well, it's got to be sapphire. I mean, to be honest, I was joking about this with another cutter just right before you came up. Sapphire is easy to cut. It doesn't scratch. It's slow, and you need tools that'll get worn out quickly. But it cuts and polishes beautifully, so it's always really fun to cut. Well, interestingly enough, when I was trying to study how to maximize dispersion in designs, I created a design that specifically was a round that I meant to enhance dispersion. And I cut it in a whole series of synthetics that have a different amount of dispersion to see how the effect changed. So I did it in, CZ, synthetic rutile, which is just off the charts, gadolinium garnet, so I went through each one of those. So yeah, I'll do it for fun.